episode 2 with your boy John Lodge from the Sports Lodge and Jordan Grenke from Castle Grenke. Jordan, it's been a while since we talked about UFC. The last time we had a conversation, Daniel Cormier had his eyeball poked near back to the back of his skull, and we were both a little bit salty about the situation. And my point of view still hasn't changed on that fight, but we have had some others since, most notably Frankie Edgar with a questionable win, in my opinion. But I'll throw it over to you, man. What were your takeaways from the last fight night?
You know what? I love these people hanging on. We can call them the old guard if you want. The Robbie Lawlers, the like the Frankie Edgars, a lot of these other people kind of holding on to the early 2000s of MMA. You know what? I'm just going to keep it simple. I love Frankie Edgar. Hard pressed to find anybody tougher. I love what he's doing. I love that he's still competing at his age. I think he's 38. And he's still competing at the highest of high levels. Pedro Munhoz, this is the guy who beat Cody Garbrandt, knocked him out, actually. So he's had a lot of great wins. And I'm happy to see Frankie Edgar get the W, kind of the same way I was with Weidman, a little bit of an emotional thing. I think you got to give Frankie, a couple more fights, and I don't think he has anything left to prove. I just don't want to see him get hurt, but I was just happy for him. Happy for Frankie. I thought it was pretty questionable. I think he ate a lot of leg kicks. But that's judging for MMA for you.
Well, I mean, I thought it was the cage control, too. As much as Edgar did lead in head strikes and I believe significant strikes throughout the fight, Munhoz had cage control the entire time. And there has to be something to be said for when you're advancing the whole fight. You may be eating some shots, but you're giving as good as you're getting. So that's why I was a little bit disappointed in the split decision. I would have rather have a draw there. And I think that's what we should have had. If you want to talk in that room, I don't think Edgar deserved to win the fight because I don't think Munhoz deserved to lose the fight. So in my opinion, if that's where we're at, then and I get how much stigma there is or how much there is about having a draw and how much Dana White hates it, but in that situation you're hanging a loss on someone who didn't deserve it. So I don't agree.
Isn't it funny though? Like I love Dana White. I think that he's great entertainment. I think he's a good ambassador for the sport. I don't have anything bad to say about him. But I find it interesting sometimes that he hates draws, and he said that he hates draws because they hold up a division. But he has honestly no problem holding up a division when like Conor McGregor is fighting Floyd Mayweather for like $1 bajillion, right? I think it's all situational. I can't agree with you more, John, especially in the sense that like everyone loves a clear-cut winner. But I think it's one of those rare occasions where Frankie Edgar gets the emotional win for all of us who love Frankie, but Pedro Munhoz, I mean, his stock doesn't go anywhere. I'd be surprised if he even slid down on the rankings. Maybe it would be because of Frankie, but like, I thought he looked fantastic. I thought he gave Frankie a lot of respect. He looked confident, seemed a little bit gun shy at times, but I think overall, I don't think it does anything against Pedro Munhoz other than if you take an L to Frankie Edgar, it's not like you take a huge L. The guy is one of the best of all time. So a good fight. I mean, great headliner. The entire card was a good card, a lot of interesting upsets, a lot of good comeback fights. The one thing that I noticed the most was I felt like, Robbie Lawler to me has never been the same after the Rory McDonald fights. And he's barely turned into a win. Has not looked good. I thought he actually lost the Cerrone fight. And I just think that like he's not firing on all cylinders anymore. I think 4 years ago, he beats Neil Magny fairly easily. I'm not saying Robbie Lawler shouldn't be fighting anybody. I think he's still one of the toughest, SOBs to ever do it. But he's the one guy to me looked like maybe he doesn't want to be in there anymore when he's in there. I'm sure he wants to when he's out of the cage, but he was the one that made me kind of be like, oh man, I miss the old Robbie Lawler, whereas Frankie looked exactly like Frankie did 5 years ago. So it was a weird night for the old guard.
Yeah, I was actually going to get into that fight card. I believe that was on the fight card after the Edgar card.
Oh yeah,
Lawler.
It was. Sorry, yeah.
No, that's totally fine. That was actually right where I was headed to because I was going to talk about Lawler and Smith, and we're talking about the old guard. Not that Anthony Smith is technically old guard, but he has fought a lot. Is this the last time we see Anthony Smith in a main event?
I don't know. To be honest, the Glover fight was really ugly. This one, I've not seen, even his losses at 185. So a bit of history. Anthony Smith was, you know, a 50-50 fighter at 185. Tough guy. No one will ever take that away from him. But wasn't putting it all together at 185. Made the jump to 205 and then just went on a tear. Met John Jones, lost to John Jones, still came back and won.
Can I stop you there? Stop you there for a second, because
sure.
we have to say that Anthony Smith could have won that fight. He could have taken the DQ. He could have gotten Jones DQ'd. So you got to give him a little bit of credit for that.
Yeah. And again, he's one of those guys that, for better or for worse, could hold the one legit. I mean, the consensus wouldn't be a legit win, but I mean, technically, John Jones, I think it's the greatest thing that ever happened to him. Him having that W is L on his record, I think, was the greatest thing that happened to John Jones, because it wasn't worried about losing after that. I think it was just smart. Anyways, you're right. He was more than entitled to do that. In this fight, however, it was the only time I can remember in a while where it genuinely seemed like he was outclassed. Even the Glover fight was pretty even until, you know, there was a lot of good exchanges. Glover's known for his cardio, and the ending of that fight is what you remember more than the actual fight itself, right? So but this is the first time, like with Rakic, he looked like he was outclassed. It looked like he wasn't on the same level as Alexander in that fight, and it was everywhere. It was on the feet. I mean, the leg kick exchanges were nuts too, but like on the ground, he looked like he was way smaller. Maybe Rakic is just that big, but I mean, yeah, I mean, the guy is just, he's as tough as they come, but where do you go? And I can't help, I hate doing this to people's records, but I have to. He beats Hector Lombard, which is what put him on, and that's 185. He beats Hector Lombard, who's a pretty tough guy, but was way at the end of his career. But then he loses to Thiago Santos. That one is the one that drives him up to light heavyweight, right? He beats Rashad Evans, not at the peak of his career. Beats Shogun, not at the peak of his career. But then he beats Ozdemir, who had recently fought Cormier. And then everyone's like, it's got to be Smith. That trajectory is a little funny. Loses to Jones, beats Gustafsson, and I think that's when you're looking at why he's been able to sustain now, right? Been in a title fight, won the next main event, and then has lost his last two. It looks to be getting worse skill-wise as it goes on. I'd like to see him. I don't know. I like him as an analyst too, so I'd like to see him maybe take some time off. He fought in May. He's fighting in August, right? Yeah, I would like to see him take some time off.
He's got he's got over 40 fights, I believe. Definitely has over 40 fights in his career. So
I think he's closer to 50.
Yeah,
he's 30. He's 33 and something. 33 and 15.
I think it might be 50 exactly then, because I think it was 33 and 17. I was looking at the record recently. So Anthony Smith. I was just thinking of that. It was just like I remember the guy, who was the title contender, and now I'm watching him get outclassed for 3 rounds by a guy that I don't know his name. Obviously, I should know his name. He's 13 and
Alexander Rakic.
But Rakic, he did what any guy should do after a dominant fight like that. He comes and he challenges for the belt, and whether or not he gets there next is up to Dana White. But is this? I guess my question is this going to be too much for this guy too soon? Because obviously, in my opinion, Smith fighting for the belt against Jones, that was too much, because that really just ended everything for him, in my opinion. I know he beat Gustafsson afterwards, but you're never going to get back to that title. You lost to the man. So is this going to be too much?
I feel like John Jones, and people look at on the surface stuff of why John Jones is good. It's painfully obvious why he's as good as he is, because he's good. The small things he does in the cage is what really makes him tremendous. And I mean, the skill set he has, his IQ is through the roof. He unintentionally, or maybe it was intentional, who knows? John Jones is the kind of guy, I don't put anything by him. He basically let everyone know how to control distance against Anthony Smith, and it's been his downfall. Now, Gustafsson didn't look at it at all. Gustafsson was fighting Gustafsson's fight, right? Even Glover was able to pick up on how to manage your distance with Anthony Smith, and Alexander Rakic did almost the exact same thing. It's very tiny things, how they're cutting off the cage, how to work the lead leg, and really, I think that Anthony Smith would have to kind of do one of those things where you completely change your style. The way Cejudo changed his style, where he all of a sudden became like a karate stance guy versus a boxing stance guy. You have to really make people guess. I think the tape is out, and whether people want to watch the tape on him or not is up to them. As far as Rakic goes, he's been on a tear. He literally got into the UFC and was had a couple decision wins. People weren't big on him, right? Then he TKOs a guy named Devin Clark. Then he's up against Jimmy Manuwa. He was a huge underdog on the Gustafson Smith card, and then he head kicks Jimmy Manuwa. Nuts. I think he beat Volkan Ozdemir. I thought it was a split decision. I thought for sure he beat him, and that's why he gets an opponent like Anthony Smith. And again, even his progression from what have been, I think, the New Year's Eve card or just before it in 2019 to this fight in August of 2020. I mean, this guy is 28 years old. He's just getting better and more confident, beating guys at the top of the division. I don't think he's next, but I think he's a fight or two off.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, with the belt up in the air right now, we don't know who the champion is, so we don't know who he would be competing against. So everything is up in the air. But I just don't want to see a fighter get stifled. That's my only thing. I want you to stoke the fire, not smother the fire, right?
Yeah.
So let's build superstars and let's not put them in situations just because we see the growth and we get excited. Let's not put them in situations that are over their heads.
Right.
So I'm looking at the actually, before I get into the next UFC event with which Alistair Overeem is headlining, you brought up an interesting point with Anthony Smith, and I'm done talking about him specifically, but you brought up an interesting point that I wanted to hit on. You said that they're cutting off the octagon, and this smaller octagon, is it like a 25-foot octagon? This smaller octagon must make it even more difficult for somebody like Anthony Smith to have to deal with someone who's making those adjustments because it's causing even less space to move around. So what does that do to the competition?
It depends on, a lot of people keep saying that they train in these small octagons, so it won't be a problem. But when you train in those small octagons, you get into the big arena. I think there's a psychological effect that happens. The hardest thing is imagine staying in the center, being blindfolded, and then telling yourself, it's 5.5 steps to the cage, right? What ends up happening is it's more like 3.86 steps to the back of the cage. So it's all you can round it off in your head as to 1 step or a half a step. You get it's all muscle memory, and you learn about these things through repetition. And once you throw off anything like that in the cage, right, it can really mess with your head, and then you second guess everything. So I think it becomes more of a psychological play than some people. For wrestlers, I thought it would be a huge advantage. Just when we talked about Miocic and Cormier, I thought DC would be wrestling them all day long. But you've seen it. There's been a lot more in close, tight finishes because you have less space to move around. I've always been a big fan of the small guys fighting in the small cage, and the big boys in the big cage, but you don't want to have 2 cages at the event because you lose seats and it's confusing, and why bother? But I think what it does is it takes away what a guy like Anthony Smith, he said 50 fights, right? Let's say generously half of them are in a big cage, half of them are in a small cage, right? Well, 50% of his time has been spent in a big cage, and on the drop of a dime, he's got to go back to a small cage. His last 5 or 6 fights were in the big cage. So I think it just does something to you psychologically. You're seeing more experienced guys not have great performances in the small cage, and then you're seeing a lot of young guys have great performances in the small cage. So I don't know. I like them to just pick one. I feel like just go with keep the variables controlled. I mean, at this point, who cares? But yeah, I think it ends up being something you don't factor in until it's too late.
So you hit on it there. My next point is, does Dana White see this aggressive new UFC we have created with the smaller cage and say, okay, we're keeping it?
I think you do fight nights, maybe in a small cage. I think it's kind of what they're doing now. I think maybe that's right. The fight nights, the cards that aren't selling a bunch of pay-per-views, you're trying to make the fights exciting, and then letting the pay-per-views sort of sell themselves. But if I were him, I would the octagon is such a unique, like it's a trademark thing. You're not even allowed to use an octagon anywhere else. I think you just pick one size of a cage and let it be that one size. You know, I get it. The thing is, the Apex is supposed to be synonymous with the Contender Series and the Ultimate Fighter, and it's to create more action for the fighter so that they have to produce better results, better TV. Ultimately, I think when they made the move over to the Apex, they should have just said, bring in the 25-foot cage and let's keep it consistent. But they are filming the Contender Series with what's going on the UFC calendar, and nobody could have predicted COVID and all that stuff. But I feel like at this point, I'd like to see all the actual fights be in the big cage and the, let's call them tertiary competitions, like the Ultimate Fighter and Dana White's Contender Series. I'd like to see them in the small cage maybe, but I would just put any of the actual fight cards in the regular size cage if possible.
See, I guess this is where we differ. We disagree,
Yeah.
and that's what makes for a good show. I think it should all be in that small cage, man. I love them
Yeah.
being right on top of each other, having nowhere to go. We get more submissions, and we're getting more stand up, right? So you're getting less of the dancing around each other and having to gauge each other out, and more aggressive fighting. And that's what I watch the UFC for. Not that I want to see someone get, killed or detrimentally wounded, but I'm watching the UFC to watch you guys fight. If I want to watch someone dance, I'll put on Dancing with the Stars. So
and listen, there's a lot of MMA fighters in that too.
Yes, there is. So, there's plenty for me to watch there. But so for me, it's the smaller cage. Moving on though, Jordan, to the next fight night, which is Overeem versus Sakai. Overeem versus Sakai, as I say it into the microphone. Because that's going to play horrible when I edit. Is this another situation where we have Alistair Overeem, a name that me and you, that UFC fans, MMA fans, even kickboxing fans are used to hearing, and know name recognition going to be rubbed off on Sakai?
I like Sakai. He's a tough guy, some fresh blood. At this point, I don't know. I mean, Overeem's coming off a pretty big win. Other than the fact that I believe he's guaranteed like $350,000 per fight, I don't know if he's just fighting for money at this point. I don't see the upside in him fighting a non-name, but it is an opportunity for him to headline another card. It's an opportunity where I'm sure he feels like his experience will pay off. And personally, I would have thought that maybe Overeem would, I don't know, rematch JDS. Or, be in a situation where, but again, he's coming off a win. A lot of other heavyweights coming off of losses. Derek Lewis is booked. Verdum's not signed. It's a tough one. I guess maybe he's just out of options and wanted to fight again, and this could be it. He's a name you can definitely bank off of. You always kind of see something new out of him. I was pretty surprised to see that was his opponent, but the show doesn't stop at the UFC, and it's definitely intriguing. You got a young buck who's pretty much 50-1-1, and Overeem who has close to 70 fights, right? Overeem still looks like he's got something left. And, is Augusto going to be the kind of guy that puts a stamp on a huge name here? I don't know. Makes it intriguing. I'm surprised, but it's not exactly a stacked card. It's your basic fight night card. There's some interesting stuff on here, but seems to be a lot of the people who are actively fighting routinely in the quarantine COVID-19 cycle, which is good. People are staying busy and getting paid. So it's interesting. I'll give it that. I'm not a huge fan, but it's interesting.
Yeah, well, I was just and it's 65 fights for Overeem. So yeah, very close to 70. The man's got an amazing record at 46-18 with one no contest. So a Hall of Famer, a combat Hall of Famer, no doubt. He's coming off of a win. Maybe we do see Overeem win this one, because I'm looking at the statistics here, and we're looking at an almost 9-inch reach advantage for Overeem in this fight.
It's a big one.
So that to me, and as much as reach doesn't matter too much, and these are big boys, and you could throw up qualifier after qualifier at me, I'm telling you, reach matters, man. Reach matters a lot. And Alistair Overeem is going to use that to his advantage. And maybe we see another resurgence. I'm not saying we ever see Overeem with another shot at the title because he never really lived up to the hype. But the heavyweight division, we've talked about it before. The heavyweight division needs these guys. They need these contenders. They need the division to have more than just two names. You need a strong division to build the hype for when you do have title fights. So, yeah, I'm all for Alistair Overeem continuing on being strong. And that is really the only fight on this card. You mentioned it, the only fight to really talk about on this one.
Yeah, there's
then I was just
good
gonna
matchups,
say,
but yeah.
The next big fight night leading up to the next pay-per-view is obviously Colby Covington, right?
Oh my goodness.
So that's one that we do have to cover. I'm sure we'll cover it closer to the date because we're looking too far in the future. But speaking of the future, we spoke about him already.
Oh my God.
It's like speaking the name you should never speak from Harry Potter. Johnny Bones Jones.
Johnny Bones Jones
vacates the light heavyweight 205 belt. And I have recently listened to interviews with Francis Ngannou, who is fully expecting that he will be the man challenging Stipe Miocic next for the world heavyweight, or for world heavyweight, I'm talking wrestling here, for the UFC heavyweight championship. But is that the truth? Are we going to see Ngannou versus Stipe, or is Jones going to jump the line and make some people a little bit mad?
It is. So I'm going to go, you know what? I'm going to go one bigger for you. Just when you thought, I'm going to go total promotion here on
triple threat. We're going to do a triple threat.
I think a triple threat. Yeah. Just when you thought you had this thing figured out, just when Cormier goes out, has his performance, it's an emotional one. Stipe climbs to the top of the heap again. He's a champion of the world. Literally the same night that Daniel Cormier rides off into the sunset, John Jones goes, yeah, but there's me. And then you're just like, oh my gosh. And Jones has come out and explained his position and analyzed how much weight he needed to gain. And Dana White comes out and says he would have a title shot right away. And Francis Ngannou is saying, Dana White promised me I get a shot. And then Daniel Cormier says Francis needs his shot. And then Stipe says, I already beat Ngannou. I think I want a fresh challenge. And everyone's going, is it John Jones? Brock Lesnar does not sign with the WWE, is a free agent. So now I don't know what to think because I got to keep in mind there's the competitive matchups, there's the right thing to do, and then there's business. And the UFC plays real loose with all of those things, right? So let's be honest here. Why not have Stipe Miocic fight Francis Ngannou for a second time and have John Jones fight Brock Lesnar? That would be crazy, except I am dying. I've been waiting my whole life for Brock Lesnar to fight Fedor Emelianenko, which when they were both in their prime would have been the greatest heavyweight fight ever. Would have been the most interesting thing. I just want to see it happen because Fedor is my all-time favorite fighter. The question sounded more like, does John Jones get a title shot? Of course he gets a title shot. He's the greatest of all time in his weight class. He's arguably wiped out that weight class twice. And you give John Jones whatever he wants. I know he's a headache, but you give Stipe what he's earned and you give John Jones what he kind of deserves. And then what you do is you pit the pure firefighter, community caring, great father, loyal husband, Stipe Miocic, to be the guy who's going to give the evil John Jones his L. I mean, the marketing for that would be unbelievable. So I think Ngannou, I feel horrible for him. He is starched. He beat Cain Velasquez, Junior Dos Santos. He's beaten Rosenstrike. He's beaten everybody. There's no one else for him to fight. Curtis Blades. He's beaten everybody. But it just so happens that John Jones has been beating everybody for a little bit longer. Kind of a hot take, but I feel like you give it to Jones. Or you let Jones fight Ngannou and that person fights Stipe. But those three are, so it wasn't really a triple threat match, but it kind of is between those three. The Brock Lesnar thing is interesting. It's going to be cool leverage, but I think those three are intertwined. I'd like to see any one versus the other one, and whoever doesn't get to fight, they fight each other. Just keep those three in the wheelhouse there. That's all I care about.
So I was going to bring up the Beast. I was going to bring up Brock Lesnar, and I was getting there. It was news that hit the wire, I believe, yesterday or the day before, that Brock Lesnar had become a free agent. And it was something that honestly I had expected. I watch wrestling,
Yeah.
and there was a wrestling storyline where his longtime manager, Paul Heyman, had a new
Roman
client.
Reigns, yeah.
So you figure when Paul Heyman has a new client, you're not going to see. When Paul Heyman moved on to CM Punk, you did not see Brock Lesnar for a very long time. So once I seen this, I was like, okay, so Brock is he's going to try it. He's going to try and get clean, and he's going to try and make a comeback to the UFC. Can you imagine that card? Stipe Miocic, Francis Ngannou to John Jones, Brock Lesnar. That
It's
alone,
a super card. It's a super card.
It's a super card. It's a pay-per-view seller. It's a money maker. Everyone's going to want it. Brock Lesnar is almost as big of a pay-per-view seller as Conor
Anybody.
McGregor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The one big thing everyone's got to, if people who are watching want to keep in mind here, two things have to happen. One, the big one is Brock Lesnar has to be within the USADA testing pool for 4 months. I know he got an exception for UFC 200, and we all know that he wasn't the cleanest athlete during that fight, but there wasn't anything illegal in his system. There was a lot of, prohibitive, basically, like, he wasn't on steroids, but it was
WWE protein powder that was in his system.
Basically is what it was, right? Stuff to keep you looking big, but nothing to really affect your performance. But it's still not an approved substance. So there's a difference between illegal and unapproved or prohibited. So very interesting language. Second thing is the UFC's got your headliners are all like you've got your next 3 or 4 UFCs coming up in a row here, and it is a murderer's row of headliners. They've got Usman and Burns being finalized for 256. You're going to have Gaethje and Habib. You're going to have Costa and Adesanya. And then, again, we broke the news kind of when we were chatting before the show. Dana White confirms they're working on Masvidal versus Diaz 2, the BMF belt rematch for sometime in January.
Can I stop you there for a second?
Yeah.
Is that a main event?
It has to be, yeah.
Or is that a co-main?
I think it's a main event because there was two reasons. One is it was a doctor stoppage, and there's a big controversy with Diaz saying he was just getting started, and Masvidal was breathing heavy, and yada, yada, yada. Didn't get to finish the full fight. So it's a main event because the last one's for a main event. You know that Masvidal is going to put the belt back up, right, for all that stuff. Masvidal is a hero because he saved the Usman fight. No one blames him. Stock has not gone down. It's 100% a main event. It's a pay-per-view. One of those very rare ones. Well, it would be for a belt. He would put the BMF belt back up. I think that would be a fair thing to say. We might see the BMF belt actually get defended, so that would be wild. But I mean, all your pay-per-view main events are pretty much, so you're looking at earliest like January, February, and Conor McGregor still doesn't have a fight. So like the UFC, I mean, first of all, are just probably at this point investing in a money printing business because, I mean, even without seats, this is such a cool time. You imagine taking a few months off and letting your champions rest up and having Masvidal, Diaz, and Conor the following month, and then doing something like Jones or the heavyweight championship. It's crazy, man. It's crazy. It's nuts. But I think that it gives Brock enough time to enter the pool, take 4 months. Your next 4 months of competitions are all your pay-per-views. You're not going to stick Brock Lesnar on a fight night anyway. So, like, it's going to be a pay-per-view card. The next one you maybe have available is earliest January. Oh, John, I just thought, what if you did double headliner, BMF title, and then like an actual championship title?
Well, that's what I meant. Like
that'd be crazy.
A co-main, like you call it a co-main, but it'd be like a double main event.
But it's still
right?
a title fight. Yeah. I love double title fights.
And I don't know if this is true or not, but this is just coming to my mind. The last time we saw Brock Lesnar on WWE television was at their WrestleMania. WrestleMania was in February. We are now in September. So if Brock Lesnar has been meaning to do this, he's probably been clean for quite some time. And would he maybe not have submitted himself to the USADA testing pool before? Would that have been news? Would we know about that? Or would he have done that quietly? And now that he's a free agent, we find out that Brock Lesnar has indeed already been being tested by USADA, and he could indeed fight sooner than what we think.
I believe you were allowed. I mean, I don't know what the Public Health Information Act is like in the States. If it's anything close to what it is in Canada, you don't have to disclose that stuff. USADA certainly is not going to disclose it for you, and the UFC's policy is that they don't discuss it. Interviewers ask the fighter, and they say yes or no whether they're in or out of the pool. Interestingly enough, Daniel Cormier, another heavyweight, recently just said when they called him, the USADA person called them and said, "Are you staying in the pool, the UFC testing pool?" It was the first time that he had kind of been like, "No, I'm actually going to retire. Like, take me out of it," because he's been in the pool. Remember, he's 41. He's been in there since he was just before his 20th birthday. So he's been a clean athlete, being tested by USADA before the UFC even had it, right up until he was 41. So, like, you know, I mean, that's you can go in and out of it pretty, you know, privately. So maybe he has. Great point.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. And, you know, we got to get out of here. We got an important basketball game coming up. We got to watch Go Raptors. Yeah, you know, there isn't a lot else to talk about here. We're going to be back at it again when we have some more information about the upcoming fight nights. We had to get in here. We had to talk about the social justice. We had to talk about what was going on in the world of sports.
For sure.
And we had to talk about John Jones and the Brock Lesnar situation. So I hope everybody enjoyed it. I know I enjoyed it. I always enjoy talking to you, Jordan.
Yeah, me too, brother. You know, next week we'll talk about everything. We got a whole bunch. We'll wait for all these fights to finalize, then we'll really dive into them.
Well, that's exactly it. I want to get everything finalized, and then I want to dig into the research, and then we will let you know exactly who we think is going to win, who's going to be who's going to be holding the titles coming into the new year. We'll look forward at it all, but that's all in the future. This has been the Puncher's Chance from the Sports Lodge and Castle Granke. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Go Raptors. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers.
See you soon, bud.